The gymnasium at the Felt Forum in New York City smelled of leather and iron, and the particular kind of sweat that only comes from men who have spent their lives being hurt. It was February of 1981. Outside, the temperature had dropped to 11 degrees. Inside, it was close and warm and loud, with the sound of gloves meeting mitts and trainers calling out instructions in short, clipped phrases. There were 214 people in that room. Most of them were boxers. Most of them were young. Most of them had come in some form or another because they believed that boxing was the highest expression of what a man could do with his hands. He was 14 years old. He stood 5 feet 8 inches and weighed 189 pounds, and every pound of it was working muscle. His name was Mike Tyson. He had been training under Cus D'Amato for 2 years by then, and in those 2 years he had done something that grown men with professional records had not been able to do. He had made the trainers at Catskill nervous. Not cautious, nervous, the kind of nervous that lives behind the eyes and does not go away when you leave the building. He was already faster than fighters 7 years older. He was already hitting harder than men who had been paid to fight. He had a chin that absorbed punishment the way a stone wall absorbs wind, and he had hands that traveled in arcs that the eye struggled to follow. In sparring sessions that winter, he had stopped 4 separate partners in the 3rd round or earlier. 2 of them were professionals. He had not yet turned 15. He was not arrogant. He was certain. There is a difference. Arrogance borrows confidence from somewhere it does not belong. Certainty is built brick by brick from evidence. Mike Tyson had the evidence. He had seen what he could do, and he believed what he had seen, and that belief was total and grounded and not yet complicated by failure. He had also, by February of 1981, developed an opinion about martial arts. It was not a respectful opinion. He had seen karate practitioners on television, moving through slow combinations in white uniforms, breaking boards, performing forms that looked to his eye like dancing. He had watched kung fu films and tournament footage, and the kind of demonstrations that martial artists staged in gymnasiums and convention centers. And what he had concluded, with the quiet finality of a 14-year-old who had already knocked out grown men, was that it was theater. Organized, disciplined theater, but theater nonetheless. A man who spent his life breaking boards had never been hit by someone who was trying to remove his head. A man who had never been hit that way did not know what he was doing. This was the context. This was what he carried into the room on that February afternoon when a man in a gray sweatshirt and plain dark trousers walked through the gymnasium door and was met, immediately, by nothing. No applause, no recognition. A few glances. The gym returned to its noise within 4 seconds. The man set a bag down near the far wall. He removed his sweatshirt. Beneath it he wore a plain white t-shirt that had been washed many times. He sat down on a wooden bench and unlaced his street shoes and set them side by side beneath the bench, with the care of someone who has learned not to waste a single movement. If you want to know what happened in the next 4 minutes, and what Mike Tyson said afterward, a sentence that no one who was present has ever forgotten, then stay with this until the end. Because what was said in that gymnasium on a February afternoon in 1981 did not stay in that gymnasium. It traveled. It changed shape as it moved. And the version that finally came to rest, decades later, in the memoir of a man who had been in the room, contained something that neither of the 2 principals ever confirmed, and neither ever denied. But we will get to that. What matters now is the room. The noise of it. The smell of it. The 14-year-old in the corner whose eyes had moved to the door when it opened, and had not moved away since. A trainer named Leonard Doyle was standing 4 feet from the bench when the man in the white t-shirt sat down. Leonard Doyle had been in boxing for 19 years. He had worked corners at Madison Square Garden. He had seen the sport at its best and at its considerably less than best. He recognized Chuck Norris the moment the door opened. He said nothing. He watched. Chuck Norris was 41 years old that February. He was 5 feet 10 inches and weighed 168 pounds. He was not large. He was not, by the standards of the room he had just entered, physically imposing. He had competed in karate from 1962 to 1974, winning the professional middleweight karate championship of the world 6 consecutive times, retiring undefeated. He had trained with Bruce Lee. He had trained with Joe Louis. He had spent the better part of a decade fighting men who were trying, within the rules of their sport, to separate him from consciousness, men who were fast and experienced and merciless in their technique. He had not lost. He had then spent years teaching what he knew, and what he knew was considerable. And it was not the kind of thing that could be read from a gray sweatshirt and plain dark trousers and a pair of street shoes set neatly beneath a bench. If you are not already subscribed, do it now, and leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. Because what Mike Tyson did when he crossed that gymnasium floor is the turning point, and we are about to get to it. The 14-year-old watched the older man sit. He watched him remove his shoes. He watched him begin, with no warm-up visible from across the room, to stretch. Not aggressively, not with the theatrical limberness of a man proving something, but with the quiet efficiency of a body that knows what it requires and takes exactly that and nothing more. He did not bounce. He did not roll his shoulders. He did not crack his knuckles or his neck. He performed 4 specific movements in a sequence that took 90 seconds. And then he stopped. And he was still. The 14-year-old said something to the trainer beside him. The trainer, whose name was Raymond Esteves and who had been working with Tyson for 8 months, would later recall the words precisely. He said, "That's a karate man." Then he laughed. It was a short laugh, 2 beats, expelled through the nose. It was not a cruel laugh. It was the laugh of a young man who has assessed a situation and found the assessment to be obvious, and the obviousness to be slightly absurd. The laugh said, "Here, in this room, where we do real things, that, a man who breaks boards." Leonard Doyle heard the laugh. He turned toward the boy. He said nothing. Chuck Norris did not hear the laugh. He was 40 feet away and the gymnasium was loud. He was looking at the floor in front of him with the expression of a man going through a private checklist, not anxious, not excited, simply present. A fighter named Garrison Webb, who had a professional record of 14-3 and who was, by his own later account, watching everything in the room that afternoon out of professional habit, said that the older man in the white t-shirt had a stillness that he had not seen before. Not the stillness of someone waiting. The stillness of someone who has already arrived somewhere and is simply occupying the space. What happened next was not an incident. It did not begin with a confrontation or an escalation or a public challenge issued across a crowded room. It began quietly, the way most things that matter begin. Chuck Norris had come to the gym at the invitation of a mutual acquaintance, a man named Patterson who consulted for both the boxing world and the film industry, and who moved between the two with the ease of someone who understood that both were at their root the same business, the business of controlled violence made watchable. Patterson had arranged for Norris to observe a training session and meet a few of the trainers. It was a professional visit. It was low-key. It was not intended to be anything other than what it was. But Patterson was late. And in the 12 minutes before Patterson arrived, a 14-year-old named Mike Tyson crossed a gymnasium floor. He did not cross it aggressively. He crossed it with the directness of a young man who does not waste steps, and does not practice approaches. He walked to within 6 feet of the bench where Chuck Norris was sitting, and he stopped, and he looked at the older man with an expression that Leonard Doyle would later describe as pure uncomplicated appraisal. He was not being disrespectful, he was doing what he always did, reading. Processing, he said with the bluntness of someone who has not yet learned that bluntness sometimes requires softening. "You do karate." It was not a question. Chuck Norris looked up. He said, "I do." The 14-year-old said, "I saw a demonstration once. A man broke 15 boards." He said it, and paused, and in the pause was everything the sentence needed. Then he said, "A board does not hit back." A fight, Chuck Norris had been told by Bruce Lee in a kitchen in Los Angeles in 1967, is not two men hitting each other. A fight is a conversation about distance. The man who controls how far apart two bodies stand controls everything that happens between them. Every technique in the known canon of every martial tradition is, at its core, an argument about distance. Come closer. Stay there. Go back. The fighter who wins is the fighter whose argument prevails. Chuck Norris looked at the boy for 3 seconds. He said, "You are right. A board does not hit back." There was a pause. Then he said, "Stand closer." Raymond Esteves from across the room saw the boy's posture change. Not retreat. Esteves was emphatic about this in the account he gave 22 years later. Not retreat. Recalibration, the kind of subtle shift in the center of gravity that a trained eye reads as, something just changed. The boy took one step forward. He was now 4 feet away. Chuck Norris stood up from the bench. He did not stand up quickly. He stood up the way a man stands up from a pew at the end of a service, complete, unhurried, accustomed to the motion. He was 4 inches taller than he had appeared sitting. He was, Raymond Esteves would write, somehow larger standing than the dimensions of him would suggest. The gymnasium had not gone quiet. The gymnasium never went quiet. Mitts were still being hit. Jump ropes were still turning. Someone near the back wall was counting loudly in sets of 8. But within a radius of approximately 30 feet, the activity had slowed. Not stopped. Slowed. The way water slows when it approaches something solid. 3 trainers had turned. Garrison Webb had moved 3 feet to his left for a cleaner sightline. Leonard Doyle had not moved at all. He was standing with both hands flat at his sides, watching. Chuck Norris said, "Put your hand up," not as a challenge, as an instruction. The voice was the same register it had been for the entire conversation, level, dry, containing nothing extra. The boy put one hand up. What happened in the next 4 seconds has been described by 5 different people who were present, and the 5 descriptions agree on the architecture and differ only in the texture. What everyone agrees on, Chuck Norris moved once. The movement was small. It was not a technique that any of the witnesses could name immediately, though Garrison Webb, who had studied boxing for 11 years, said later that what it reminded him of most was a slip, the small lateral rotation of the upper body that a boxer uses to let a punch pass outside the ear. Except there was no punch coming. There was a hand, held at shoulder height, 4 feet away. And Chuck Norris moved once. A rotation of the hips of perhaps 4 inches, accompanied by a corresponding shift of the lead foot, and then he was standing in a completely different place relative to the boy. Not a different room, not a different corner, a different angle, an angle from which, had he chosen, he could have ended the conversation with one movement, and the boy would have had approximately 0 ability to prevent it. The 14-year-old was still holding his hand up. He looked at where Chuck Norris had been standing. He looked at where Chuck Norris was standing now. He was quiet for 2 seconds. Leonard Doyle, from his position near the bench, said that the expression on the boy's face during those 2 seconds was not embarrassment. It was not anger. It was not deflation. It was the expression of a person receiving information. Pure signal, no noise. Chuck Norris said, "That is what distance does." He said nothing else. He did not continue the lesson. He did not elaborate or qualify or explain the mechanics of what had just happened. He said, "That is what distance does," and he returned to the bench and sat down, and he picked up a roll of tape from his bag and began wrapping his left hand, with the methodical patience of a man who has wrapped his hands 10,000 times. The 14-year-old stood where he was for another 3 seconds. Then he walked back across the gymnasium floor to where Raymond Esteves was waiting. Esteves asked him nothing. He waited. The boy said, "He is fast." That was the first thing he said. The second thing he said, Esteves reported, came after another 5 seconds of silence, and it was said quietly, in the tone of a man revising a document he had considered finished. He said, "His distance is different from our distance." Patterson arrived 11 minutes later. He introduced the two properly. There was a handshake. There were a few minutes of conversation that Patterson described as cordial and unremarkable. He recalled that Chuck Norris asked the boy about his training schedule, and that the boy answered in complete sentences, and that the exchange was polite and professionally respectful on both sides. What Patterson did not know, because he had not been present for it, was what had already happened. Garrison Webb was the vector through which the story first moved. He told it to a trainer named Okafor within the week, and Okafor told 2 fighters, and the fighters told their circles. And the story traveled the way stories travel through closed professional communities, fast and with small mutations at each telling. By the time it had completed one full rotation through the New York boxing world, it had acquired a few details it had not started with. A crowd of 40 where there had been perhaps 6 witnesses. A direct direct verbal exchange that had not in fact occurred, and a number of seconds that had been compressed from 4 to 1. The core, however, held the boy, the hand, the movement, the phrase about distance. What did not travel with the story, because it had not happened in front of witnesses, was the thing Mike Tyson said to Chuck Norris as the older man was leaving. It surfaced once, in the second chapter of a memoir written in 2003 by a man who had been a junior trainer at the gym that winter. He wrote that he had been standing near the door and had seen Chuck Norris lift his bag and say goodbye to Patterson and begin to move toward the exit, and that the boy from across the room called out to him, not loudly, but loud enough to carry, and said, "I want to train like that." The memoir does not record whether Chuck Norris heard him. It does not record whether he turned. The next line moves to a different subject entirely, and the moment is left open, which is either carelessness or precision. And it is impossible now to know which. What we know is what the witnesses know. That in a gymnasium in New York in February of 1981, a 14-year-old who would become one of the most feared fighters the sport had ever produced stood 4 feet from a man he did not know and laughed, quietly through his nose. And that 4 seconds later he was standing in the same place with a different understanding of what distance means between two men. This is what the martial arts has always known and what every fighting tradition, in its oldest and most honest form, has always taught. Competence does not announce itself. It does not dress well or arrive loudly or require a crowd to confirm its dimensions. It sits on a bench in a white t-shirt and street shoes and waits. And when the moment arrives, not a moment chosen, but a moment given, it moves once. Exactly once. And that is enough. The greatest fighters are not the ones who show you everything. They are the ones who show you only what you need to see, and let the rest remain below the surface, present and undemonstrated and permanent. Mike Tyson became the youngest heavyweight champion in history, 5 years after that February afternoon. He spoke often in the years that followed about what he learned from Kusamato and from the discipline of boxing. He spoke rarely about karate. He spoke rarely about the afternoon in the Felt Forum gymnasium. But Raymond Estaves, who was there, and who spent 26 more years in the sport before he retired, said in a 2007 interview that he had thought about those 4 seconds more than he had thought about most fights he had worked. He said, "A boy walked across a floor certain of one thing. He walked back certain of something else. That is not a small thing. That happens rarely." He paused. Then he said the man did not fight him.
He just stood in a different place. That was enough. A man who needs to prove himself has already told you something about his foundation. A man who moves once, quietly, and then sits back down and wraps his hands. That man has nothing left to prove.
He carries it with him wherever he goes, and no gymnasium, no crowd, no laughing 14-year-old with fast hands and a heavyweight future can add to it or take from it. That is the thing about Chuck Norris that has never fit neatly into any account, any biography, any title sequence, or any footage. It is not the record, it is not the championships. It is the quality of presence in a room, the specific weight of someone who has already been tested completely and found sufficient. A room knows it when it walks in, even a room that does not know who it is looking at. Next week we will look at the afternoon on a Warner Brothers backlot in 1985 when a stuntman with a professional fighting record decided to test whether the man he was working beside was real, and what the 16 people present agreed they saw in the moment that followed.